Welcome to our webinar today. We're going to talk about migrating from a legacy data warehousing environment and how to have a successful journey to cloud analytics with Snowflake. And today we have with us Telltale Gaming, one of our key customers, and also one of our solution partners at Unico. So we have a great topic today to cover, and we're excited to get going. As we've had the poll question posted, we're going to go ahead and walk through those results. And we'll see that a lot of people, a good percentage, want to learn how others have deployed data analytics on the cloud, which is a great thing to want to know about, and I think we're going to have a great story for you guys. Before we get going, a few housekeeping items. First of all, as we're going throughout, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A section at the bottom of the webinar window, and feel free to reach out. We will collect a number of those questions for the end at the Q&A session. So please, feel free as you're going throughout the session to enter those, and we'll get to those. Some will be answered during the meeting by some of the people working on this, and also at the end we'll do some in the call. Also, for everyone who's wondering, the slides will be made available following the presentation to all attendees. So again, we appreciate your attendance today. I'm your host. I'm a senior solution architect at Snowflake Computing, and I work specifically with our partners to help them get our customers onboarded and to have success with their implementations. We're going to talk about Snowflake and our data warehouse that was built for the cloud. Then we're going to have Nate West from Telltale talk about their success story. And then we've got Shankar Ramanathan from Unico to talk about the role that they played in this project. So you can see here the information. Please feel free, especially with me, to reach out and with any questions that you might have. Just as a background, I've been with Snowflake for about 2 years, and I've been a sales engineer for most of that time, and I've just recently moved into our partner team, but I've been part of many successful implementations of Snowflake among our customers. We're so grateful also to have Nate West with us from Telltale. Now, Telltale is a game maker, and they make high-end cinematic games, and some of the games you may know about from them are Minecraft Story Mode and the Walking Dead series, really exciting games and a lot of excitement in that area. And Nate is the director of analytics at Telltale, and he's going to share with us their journey into Snowflake. And we also have, as I mentioned earlier, Shankar Ramanathan, who's a senior data management consultant at Unico, who led the implementation at Telltale of Snowflake. And so we're going to let them tell their stories as we get into it. But I'm going to start off a little bit by talking about Snowflake and why Snowflake was developed. So our company is about 5 years old, and at the beginning, a lot of the problems you see today existed at that time, and they've only grown since then. You see a lot of data silos because of data volumes. I had previously worked in the data field at Amazon.com in the retail space, and our data, because of the volumes of data that we were dealing with, was siloed in different areas for different data sets, because we had some data sets like the financial data that was very small relatively, and the clickstream data that was huge. And so we had very siloed data, and we had to work with a lot of different tools to get that data together for our reporting. On top of that, there's complexity. Hadoop and Spark and other technologies have introduced a lot of complexity to the environment and require very specialized skills. Some of these solutions are very expensive. The cost is a big factor. A lot of enterprises have turned to appliances, data warehousing appliances, and the cost can be substantial. And the time to getting value out of your data is really a blocker for many organizations. And so many organizations move without the insight that they need from the data, and they have to make the decisions because they just can't get the data in time. And so Snowflake was built to kind of answer each of these questions. And so to overcome the problem of data silos, we put all the data in one place. And it creates a unified environment, a single version of the truth that can be accessed by multiple users and have all the different data sets, including different formats. We support both structured and semi-structured data. The other piece that we felt was very important as we got started was that it had to be simple. So the first thing that we did was we built on a SQL structure. So instead of having another language defined to query our data, everything is SQL. We've really worked hard to make it so, and it's offered a great value for our customers. The other piece is that it's delivered as a service, so you don't have to worry about managing servers or any of those pieces. You don't need to do many of the management functions that even other cloud services require. Snowflake handles automatically so that you can just work with your data. We say it simply: you create the tables, you load the data, and you run your queries. From a cost perspective, Snowflake is built as a pay-as-you-go model, and it really is a differentiator for us, because whereas before you had to spend a ton of money to get a large amount of resources, you can have the power of a very expensive system, but only run it as needed and really benefit from the scalability of the cloud. And really, all of these things combine to make Snowflake a tool for fast development at any scale. And it really provides the cloud really has made this possible. Without the cloud, Snowflake would never have been able to exist. Our founders several of them came from Oracle, and they tried to create some of these same ideas within Oracle. And without the cloud and without our partner in AWS, who provides the infrastructure on which we run, this wouldn't be possible. And so we really feel like we've been able to deliver a solution that adds a ton of business value. And people may ask, well, why yet another data warehouse product? There's so many out there. One we found is that so many of the new tools were moving away from SQL. When you think about data warehouses, they live in an environment. There's ETL tools, there are BI tools to access the data. Very few people actually interact directly with the data warehouse, but lots of people interact through other tools. And so in order to be compatible with all of these tools, we had to build a SQL interface. And on top of that, there's a large number of data workers who are very familiar with SQL and happy to work in SQL. And so that was one of the key tenets as we move forward. So you can see here, familiar SQL was one, zero management, being able to bring in all your data, working with semi-structured and structured data at large volumes. We have most of our customers have over a terabyte of data in Snowflake, and a few have over a petabyte, but many have large numbers of terabytes in the system. One of the things that Snowflake enables is concurrency, so you can have as much compute allocated as the cloud will allow, which is basically limitless. And so all of your users can have access to this data without having to copy it because of Snowflake's unique architecture. And you only have to pay for what you use, which is really one of the key things. So the way that we did this, the way we achieved it, was what we call a multi-cluster shared data architecture. So as opposed to traditional architectures, and this required a complete rewrite with no ability to leverage existing code, and so we created a system that allows multiple independent scalable compute clusters. And I encourage you, if you have a chance, to take a look at our SIGMOD paper, which is referenced on our website, if you want to know more about the specifics of the architecture. But it is really groundbreaking, and it enables some great things from a business perspective. And you can see here a little bit more of the detail. Tools like Tableau can access, BI tools access through our cloud services layer, which is always on, which handles, we call it the brains of Snowflake. It handles so much of what we do. And then you have a virtual warehouse layer that does the data processing, and then the storage is flexible and scalable, and you can add data to the storage without having to worry about adding nodes or resizing the cluster or anything like that. It automatically resizes. And so this architecture really frees us up to provide great value to our customers. And just to wrap up here, what we see a lot of is NoSQL and Hadoop replacement, combining them into one system. In a lot of other cases, we have customers that have SaaS offerings and they want to bring that data in to a single environment where they can report on that data. And so we're seeing people building data warehouses just for their SaaS data. And then in other cases, we're seeing the migration from traditional data warehouses to the cloud with Snowflake, creating a much more flexible and easy-to-use environment. And so I'm going to turn the time over here now to Nate West, the Director of Analytics from Telltale. And I'm just to introduce Nate. He started at Telltale in early March of this year, and he's been working with Snowflake since April. And as he came on at Telltale, his goals were to bring access and standardization of data throughout the organization in order to empower the game studio to make and market better games. So basically using the data that they had available to improve their product. And Nate specializes in behavioral analytics with previous experience in the mortgage industry and in human capital analytics, and also tracking digital piracy. And he's a self-described data nerd and thinks that everything should be measured, and that, you know, there are some challenges around that, but he's excited to be in that field. And I'll turn it over to you now, Nate.
Thanks, Todd. And thank you also to Shankar and Unico and Snowflake for giving me the opportunity to talk a little bit about what we're doing here at Telltale, as well as the 74% of you that are interested in kind of our journey over the last 6 months. So before we move on, we'll talk a little bit about our next poll question. So if you take a couple seconds to answer, you know, what data sources would you like to analyze today? Maybe ones that you're not necessarily analyzing as frequently as you want. So, you know, social media, customer-facing mobile applications, traditional applications in a more structured form, or weblog data in its massive, massive form. And as you take a second to answer that, I'll talk a little bit more about Telltale and what we're doing here. So as Todd said, you know, I started in March, and really bringing traditional analytics functions into Telltale. So, you know, we've been using data and looking at data in various forms since the company was founded. But the goal of really the team in its current state is to bring that into a more into an environment where we can answer a lot of questions rather than very specific questions that we knew to implement before a game launched or before a game released. So we'll go to the answers. So it looks like almost 80% are using traditional applications and structured data. Not surprising, obviously that's really where the ecosystem still is. In my experience, while NoSQL systems and other large data warehousing systems are becoming more and more popular, it seems like a lot of people are still accessing things through Microsoft SQL Server, MySQL, and things like that. So definitely not a surprising result, at least to me. So a little bit about Telltale. As Todd mentioned, Telltale creates high-end cinematic story-based games where a user will choose how they want to interact with the non-playable characters. So as situations roll out, you might be presented with a question, have 4 choices on how to answer, as well as big kind of divergent choices throughout the game. And so our goal is to really allow people to play a franchise that they know. You know, we license all of our IP from existing franchises. You see here kind of an exhibit of our more popular games. Minecraft Story Mode obviously being one that was in the market this year. Batman, which came out in April, and a couple of our older franchises, Walking Dead, Wolf Among Us, and Borderlands. Wolf Among Us and Borderlands are my personal favorites there. They're phenomenal stories and really a lot of fun to play. So shameless plug, but if you're looking for something fun to do over the Christmas holidays, Tales from the Borderlands and Wolf Among Us are quite enjoyable. So a little bit more about Telltale. The company was founded in 2004. We release on all major gaming platforms. We're in over 10 digital stores. So you can imagine we have a lot of different directions in which our sales and download data comes in, as well as a pretty big hose of game data coming directly from the game clients. We make story-based games where users' choices impact how the game unfolds. As I mentioned, we license our property from A-list franchises, and our content is released episodically. So while a season will tell a complete story, that season typically comprises of 5 episodes, and we'll release that content every 4 to 6 weeks at a cadence where someone that's playing our game right when it releases will only be able to play episode 1 and over the course of a couple months, other episodes will kind of come out from there. To talk a little bit about the analytics scope at Telltale, so the focus since I've started is really federating our multiple data streams, getting access to and being able to report on our game data, incorporating our sales data, looking at that in the same place as our social platforms, as well as understanding our web presence. How many people are going to our website, how many people are creating accounts, and things like that. It's also a goal to provide marketing executives, producers, and creative staff telemetry on user data, understanding how our users want to interact with us, where they do interact with us, what's effective and maybe what's not effective are big pieces to what we're trying to do here at Telltale. Speaking specifically about the game data, some of the quirks about that data that really made it a pretty easy choice to go with Snowflake is that our data was not initially accessible to non-technical users. So we had stored it in DynamoDB. On top of that, it was untranslated in key value pairs. So very, very long tables, not really reporting or analytics ready. And on top of that, we could log into our DynamoDB platform, but we couldn't understand or read it in the data. So a lot of what we were doing had to be set up beforehand. And if anyone had questions as the game was going, it was harder than it really should be to report on historical data. Storage costs were high. DynamoDB and Elastic Cache, which we'll talk about next, are some of the more expensive storage options in the AWS cloud. Our data comes in JSON data format from the game engines, and we are entirely an AWS shop. So our games sit on and talk to those servers, and our user authentication and everything is handled through AWS. So if you looked into Snowflake or heard about Snowflake in the past, this tends to tick a lot of their boxes. They're incredibly skilled at processing JSON data in a fast and scalable way. Their storage is in S3, which is one of the cheaper storage options in Amazon Cloud Services. And by using the SQL database, I'm able to access and translate, join other tables to our data, and understand and make human readable some of the data elements that we have. So really not a hard choice. I think the hardest part about purchasing Snowflake was convincing my boss that Snowflake was not someone I met at Burning Man. So pretty easy choice and really a quick stand-up once we started going live. So to give an example of what our technical solution looked like before we moved to Snowflake, so we had game clients talking to servers in Amazon where they would send data depending on the data type to a couple different areas. So we're using Amazon Elastic Cache to do kind of error logging and make sure that if we needed to or something went wrong, we could quickly debug and look into that. We're also using a relational database service where we're doing user authentication and steps like that. And then we were saving all of our game data in that key value untranslated structure into Amazon DB. This was very useful because our game engine needed to quickly pull certain elements about a user's gameplay, but really wasn't the analytics solution that we needed to go forward. So while we were using Amazon S3, it was mostly to handle things like our patches and our DLC updates. And so that was going back to the game client and working there. So to now kind of shift to what it looks like now that Snowflake's fully integrated. What you see here primarily is that we've removed two forms of storage. And while we still use them on a very micro scale to do some of that key event communication to the game engine that needs to be very quick and low latency, we were really able to reduce our DynamoDB instance by over 90%. We're still using our relational database services because that is our user auth table, but we've pointed that data into S3. As well as all of the other game analytics data into our S3 bucket. From there, we just pull it into Snowflake and can use some of their technology and scale to parse, ETL, translate, and get our data into a wider format, which is more analytics ready. And so to kind of zoom into Snowflake and talk a little bit more about our process, in the implementation phase, one of the big things we had to do internally was get our game data pointed at S3. So using Amazon's native services, we used data pipelines to start porting that compressed JSON raw data directly to S3. We also implemented kind of data feeds from all of our store using a similar technology. That got into our Amazon S3 bucket. Then on a scheduled basis, we would run ETL scripts. Ultimately, this is entirely run in Snowflake. So we're not using an ETL service to do it outside or on top of Snowflake. Ultimately, what this is I bring my data into a database. I run scripts on top of it to get it into a form that's accessible, and then I save it out into our OLAP or dev environments, depending on the data or what we want to use it for. The nice thing here is that, and one thing you might have not seen on the other slide, was that now analysts can connect to it, they can query off the data, and we're also able to more easily implement dashboards. And so connecting our game data, our sales data, as well as having native connections to all of our web portals allows us to actually view and look at the data in one spot. And with that, we have access to our data. And so, we're able to do things like A/B conversion reporting, looking at game telemetry like popularity of platforms or current players. And you see some numbers here. For one of our games, we had 68 billion events in our DynamoDB table that are now in Snowflake. So you can imagine, and one of the things I really like about it is it's not about limiting the amount of data you send. It's really about the ability to access all of it if that's what you need. Now, I will say, which I think is very typical of analytic systems, of that 68 billion rows, not all of it is necessary. But one of the things that I loved about Telltale when I started is that we're a very data-focused company. And so one of the mandates that we had was let's track everything. So, if you go left, if you go right, if you choose a choice, we even have some error messages firing just to make sure things are working appropriately. We're tracking everything. And so to be able to access that and query that in a way that works within business cycles is obviously a very important part of our business. So now let's talk about the ETL process. So the ETL process it was really just me writing SQL scripts. So using some native libraries within Snowflake to parse and flatten JSON objects, we were able to get our data into a semi-structured form that was much easier for me to work with simply because I had been working with it for my entire career. And so in about a month after we signed our agreement with Snowflake, we were up and running, and I was able to do ad hoc query analysis, help our UI team understand what features people were utilizing, help our marketing team understand number of active players, things like that. So very quick to initially stand up, but obviously something where you're really standing it up with someone that is writing primarily in SQL. And so what I did is at first I was able to write the process fairly completely, but then every day as I ran it, something new came up. There was a corrupt element in our data. There was this happening. There was this happening. So my ETL process moved from about 4 steps initially on day 1 to I think 30 steps at the end. And it was doing things like loading our data into the Snowflake environment. It was parsing out the user data. Then it was parsing the next array and parsing out the user session data, then parsing the further array and parsing the event data. But we've been building games since 2004, and nothing stays standard in the data world for that long. So what I ended up having to do was write a lot of steps to do error and exception handling, legacy games versus current games, working around some of the errors and issues I've seen. And slowly, this process kind of ballooned or grew over time. And that's really where Unico coming in helped out quite a bit, because while I was able to stand it up quickly, they were able to productionize it just as quickly. And so it took that piece out of my hands and allowed me to really have an analytics function that was more of a proof of concept in very quick order. So what they did is they took all of my scripts. I gave them access to a partition of our Snowflake data warehouse as well as some sample data, and they looked at the steps that were causing a lot of time. So you can imagine loading data, fairly straightforward. Parsing the header of a JSON blob, also fairly straightforward. But where they really shined were combining the steps previously into one step. And so you can imagine where you lose some of the inefficiencies that are all in the create table and copy commands. They were able to do that in one step where before it had been 3 or 4. And that's really where we saw most of the savings and efficiency improvements. And so with that, the results were quite strong. So just by simply combining those 3 steps, they allowed us to parse our JSON 50% more efficient than we had before. Because the process was incorporating other data elements as well as doing other steps, they improved our front-to-back ETL process by over 30%. And the part that really helped me out was they were able to hand over proprietary technology that allowed me to schedule these ETL scripts into a form of a cron job. So instead of having to bug my back-end engineers to find time in their busy schedules to set up things like this, I'm ultimately using Unico's scripting tool as a way to automate the process. And this is great. Before I would come into the office, sit down, fire the scripts off, make coffee, do a couple things, and they really remove that kind of ritual from my day. And that takes a lot of the human error out of the process. So while you might forget or run something twice or certain attributes that might cause your day to be more of a headache than you expected, the automation really helps take that completely out of it. So I call this clause, Nate can now take paid time off. So I was really happy about that as well. But a great solution and a great outcome, and really helped our process kind of automate. So talking about some of the benefits, because in my mind, they're really not entirely focused on cost. The benefits that I enjoyed working with Unico is really the rigor behind their testing. So, what they ended up delivering and the work they did, they ran multiple different options, multiple different ways. So not only were they, Snowflake experts and could come in and kind of take my learning curve from, that first month and speed it up dramatically, but when they delivered something, I had a lot of faith in what they were saying, because I saw the different ways they had tried to implement and run, and I saw the rigor behind the testing and what they delivered to me. On top of that, it was a plug-and-play deliverable. They provided the script. I deleted the parts that they optimized, put that in, ran it the next day, and it ran without any issue. So it was really quite nice to have that easily implemented. It didn't take me a lot of time to implement their findings. And then with that scripting tool, one of the things that's really nice is there's just simply access to the data at the start of the business day. Before, as I would come in and run, I would either run things at home or right when I got in the office. But one of the things that I've always struggled with typical structured SQL environments is making sure I can answer the questions within the course of the business cycle. And so with working with Unico and working with a technology like Snowflake, I really got the best of both worlds. So Unico optimized and automated the process so that I was able to have dashboards refreshed, have the previous hours or days of data there when I needed it, and that allowed me to focus on answering the questions when they came in. So before, when someone would say, shoot me an email at 7 in the morning saying, hey, I need you to answer this question quickly, I knew that came at the expense of an entire ETL process overnight. Right now, I don't have to worry about that as much. So, being able to come in, access the data, answer the questions right away, allow users to see their dashboards populate automatically, all of that is a huge benefit. In the gaming industry, we're very aware of how our games are performing and doing specifically initially on launches. And releasing content episodically over many franchises, we have releases every couple weeks. And so we're constantly trying to look at data as quickly as possible. And by optimizing the solution as well as automating it, it really allowed me to do this. On top of that, using Snowflake by itself, one of the things that I really enjoyed coming from an on-premise structured, SQL, maybe SQL Server type environment, is that Snowflake is really purpose-built for the cloud and has some of the benefits of that columnar database, as well as the fact that queries never time out. And this is something that I had struggled with for years. You write a query, you try to sample your data, you make sure you're not using too much, you run it, and about 10 minutes later, it throws an out-of-memory exception. The nice thing about Snowflake is if your query is very large, you can run a bigger data warehouse. You can just let it run for longer. There are none of those timeout issues, which added a level of anxiety to my job that just no longer exists. Also working with Unico, and I mentioned this earlier, it really improved my understanding of Snowflake and understanding where Snowflake as a technology differed from my experience in the past. So understanding how to use some of their proprietary libraries, understanding how to set up my database and table structure in a way that allows me to very efficiently access the data is also something that would have simply taken me longer to do. And it's not like it's not possible without it, but I think it really speeds it up. You know, Snowflake as a technology has an amazing documentation portal, and really in that first month setting stuff up as a proof of concept, I was able to do it entirely just by accessing those docs, asking questions of people in the support environments. But Unico really sped that up, and without me having to find time in my schedule, taught me a lot about Snowflake as a technology. And then finally, and I think this one's really pivotal, you know, it allows analysts to be analysts, not coders. You know, when I was looking for people to join my team, I was able to ask for SQL as a technology, not Python, Talend, or all of these other attributes that that might be necessary to work with or access Hadoop, NoSQL systems, and other databases like that. But more importantly, you know, it allows us to access the data, to analyze the results, and see what's there. And I think that's a really powerful tool and something that a lot of businesses tend to forget. And that's kind of why I wanted to cap this off with something we had done. So, you know, I believe an analytics function is really to improve the business and help you do things in a better way. So, you know, it's not necessarily about replacing all of the voices in the room with data. It's really about using data so you can make more informed decisions rather than gut reaction decisions. And this was something that I really enjoyed doing and really was the heart of why we wanted to develop a true analytics function at Telltale. And that's doing something like customer place tile clustering. So it might not be this for your business. It might be something else, conversion rate optimization, or a lot of other variables. But ultimately here, I was able to take gigs and gigs of data, something that typically wouldn't have operated either in my R environment or in my MySQL environment in previous jobs, was able to process that data at scale and give my technical suite, you know, R and things like that, smaller data bits in more structured forms so that I could run and access those models quickly. So being able to do this, help our writers out, and understand how our users are playing through our data allows our writers to write that next episode a little bit better, that next season tweaked a little bit towards customers are playing. And I think this is really where analytics and data shine in organizations today. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Shankar, who was my point of contact in the engagement with Unico, and he'll walk through a little bit more specifically what we did together and what they delivered.
Thank you, Nate. We have a poll question at this point in time. Let's start with that. If you can talk about the pain points where you are facing in some of your processing. These are the questions. You know, if you can take a minute to answer these questions, and we will continue the rest of the presentation. Polls are coming in. Give me a minute. Thank you. So it looks like bringing in the new source of data seems to be one of the major pain points, followed by obviously juggling the responsibilities and the performance and scaling up of users coming out this second, which is not surprising. We have seen this over and over. It's always the scalability and bringing new data into the mix. It's always a challenge. And that's one of the reasons Snowflake excels because of the SQL interface and familiarity with that type of databases with many people, unlike Hadoop or something which is latest at the same time, not so familiar with everybody in the mix. Let me talk about Unico a little bit. We are a global company. We have presence in multiple locations in the U.S. and also outside of U.S. in a couple of places, including Europe and Asia. One of the things Unico does the best is we are data management focused, and all of our solutions are built based on the customer feedback and the gaps in the industry, which is very important for the end users. Some of the things Nate was talking to, for example, the scheduling tool, which we are rolling out to special addition to some of our close customers, and which will be available for everybody to schedule AWS-based, especially Snowflake data loading. We will be having that. I will talk about that in a couple of slides later. Again, we are a very strategic partner with Snowflake. We have built data integration connectors for Snowflake, and we are focused on creating a value in terms of creating purposeful solutions, which is going to help our clients. So when Nate approached us to initially their problems and what they want to really solve, typically what happens is when consultants are called in, we have very limited time, and our goals and focus is always having the right best practices in place, especially around Snowflake. So one of the things we have worked on early on with Snowflake is to understand the way the architecture and the way Snowflake does today compared to our traditional databases and data warehouses. That's one of the strengths we bring to the table. Then we looked at some of the queries which is happening within the Snowflake. The way Nate has built some of the queries, it was very robust. It was solving all the issues they were facing in terms of data availability and data querying. But one of the things he was running into is how to scale these queries. So that's one of the questions, and we need to be very cognizant of that because of the new games being introduced. Batman being one of the new games which is coming online and gaining popularity. At the same time, they have to maintain the existing ones as well. And part of the pain points we understood was automation. How do we schedule these jobs so that he can free up his time to do other things rather than babysitting the data automation piece of it. Then we looked at overall what is the goal, where do we want to go, now how we want to solve this in a short period of time. Typically, we get involved in the jumpstart kind of a situation where the customers have already migrated the data, but they're running into this kind of a performance issue, or they're in the planning stages of getting into the Snowflake and they want to migrate the data. So both are different scenarios we get involved, and then there are different things we bring to the table as the pre-built ideas and approaches, which is leveraged over the course of the engagement. So what we did was, instead of giving a cookie cutter solution, we took this time to really come up with the best practices based on the architecture. We have analyzed the exact situation where they are in, and they were able to show us the actual data and also having the proper sample of data, which is going to really help us do the analysis right. So we came up with multiple analysis has been done, and then we also ran the solution. And once we have achieved the right kind of results we were looking for, the biggest bang for the buck was reducing the number of steps we had in the ETL processing. That's one of the things we focused, and we combined some of the queries and not losing the clarity of the data they wanted to have. And that has helped them immensely in terms of speeding up the process overall. So if you look at it, the amount of performance improvement, not to mention the time savings and the cost savings, what is more important is how soon can we get the data to the analyst to do the analysis. And being a data scientist, Nate was interested in compressing this timeline so that he can get to the actual answering the questions and not really loading the data. And that's what this was kept in mind, and this is where we were able to excel and deliver this situation. So if we look at it, the number of hops we had to do to actually load the data, it's a 5-step process. We kind of looked at each step, the data which is being created and manipulated. We were able to combine these multiple steps into one, which is going to really deliver the final results. So at the end of the day, when you looked at it, the overall ETL process was able to come to a total savings of 30% in terms of ETL processing. In that course of processes, we also looked at various other options, which is very useful for the type of processing Telltale is doing. For example, it's a columnar database. So there is a way to look at the types of columns you arrange and the key columns you are going to combine and do the joins. All of those things have to be done in the right way so that you can do the joins more efficiently. And we also suggested looking at the clustering as an option, which is going to really help in terms of speeding up the process. Though some of these things may not be impacting right now, but more of when you grow the volume to the point where it's going to be really impacting, that's when this is going to come in handy. And traditional data warehouses, you can add an index, and that's going to speed up some of those things, and they are limiting in terms of capabilities. Whereas Snowflake doesn't have all of those limitations, but there are levers which you can really pull to make it more efficient. Finally, the other option we were talking about is how to automate the jobs which is being kicked off manually every day. So we came up with this AWS scheduler, which is a robust scheduler which can be used for kicking off jobs on an hourly basis or any particular interval, or it can be scheduled in a calendar basis where you can do daily, weekly, or monthly jobs. And this is a great tool in terms of automating your solutions and also your jobs and reducing the number of errors you might run into when you're doing manual processing. It's a very simple tool, but yet very powerful in terms of what it can do for the jobs on the cloud. With that, I'd like to turn this over to Todd for your questions, which we can answer at this point in time. Todd? Todd, are you there?
Oh, hey guys, I'm here. Sorry about the delay there, but I really want to thank Shankar and Nate for their time today on their presentation. And we really appreciate all the time and effort that they put into preparing to share this message with you guys. Telltale has a great story to tell about how analytics are working in their environment. With the remaining time, we're going to go through some of the questions that you guys have asked during the session. So the first question comes from Kevin Schofield, and it's for Nate. And the question is, given your Amazon centricity, what factors led you to select Snowflake over Redshift?
Yeah, Kevin, great question. And Redshift was definitely in the running. I think in my analysis process, I looked at over a half dozen data warehouse providers, companies that did a variety of different things. You know, I think the big differentiator between Redshift and Snowflake was cost and performance. So one of the things that I like about Snowflake is it's a bit more of a you know, what do you need for your current situation technology. So if I'm accessing a data table that is incredibly large, more of a data lake than a structured table, because there's an element in there that doesn't get asked quickly, but maybe you know, an executive is hot on my heels for the results for, you know, a big meeting or something that they want to talk about. What I like about Snowflake is you can very quickly spin up larger data warehouses, access larger data. So as our data is already quite expansive and will only grow over time, you know, Todd mentioned kind of the size of their customers. We're in about the 10 to 20 terabyte range, so we have plenty of data in the data warehouse already. So really cost and performance were the big drivers there. From a slightly less business justification point of view, one of the things that I liked about Snowflake was really the pedigree of their company as well as what they had done so far. You know, how they developed their technology, how they went into how they've kind of grown over time, I really appreciated. I also like that they're a leaner team. Their founders are from Oracle, so they obviously know what they're doing, and they're able to implement things, in my mind, a little bit quicker. AWS is a great technology stack. We use them for a lot, but they have a lot to think about and manage, and their company is quite large. So the speed at which Snowflake really tries to optimize their environment for their customers, as well as the piece of growing data sizes over time made that decision easier, specifically since we didn't actually have to go outside of the Amazon firewall to do any of it.
Well, thanks, Nate. That was a great answer. And the next question is also for Nate. It's from Janani from the EXO Group. And the question he has is, what kind of schema or model did you create in Snowflake? And was it a traditional multidimensional data warehouse, or did you do something else?
Kind of a blend of everything. So my dashboard-ready analytics tables are much more in a kind of a structured relational sense. You know, using centralized fact tables with dimension tables. But one of the things that I wanted to make sure is, you know, instead of trying to think about all of the situations before they happened, one of the things that I enjoy is the ability to kind of store the data more in what I said earlier, kind of a data lake or unstructured format. And what I like about Snowflake is they operate very well in both. So while a lot of dashboarding tools still like primary keys and certain things to, you know, speed up the tables, Snowflake really doesn't require that for performance, specifically when you're querying kind of unstructured or undiscovered data. So the ability to kind of do that was important to me. So I balance both, but when I do, all my dashboarding are going off of the smaller, quicker analytics ready tables. All of my ad hoc analysis typically comes straight from that large data lake or the game-specific data lakes.
Okay, thank you again for that great answer. I'm going to take the next one. It's from Lynn Weinberger, and they ask about data security related to PII and PHI information. And in Snowflake, that's one of the things that Snowflake spends a great deal of time and effort on is security within the system. So all data within Snowflake is encrypted at all times. And so from a storage perspective, the data is encrypted with unique keys for each account. It's actually a key hierarchy that starts at the account level and goes down to the database and then the table. So all the data is fully encrypted at all times in the system. For PHI specifically, we have an offering called Enterprise Secure Data that actually uses independent machines that are dedicated for that instance in order to comply with HIPAA. So obviously, you have to, within the system, you have to follow the guidelines around both PII and PHI. But Snowflake provides the environment with role-based access controls. And again, for the enterprise secure data, there's even more specific hardware-level security measures that allow you to conform to all of the compliance standards that are out there. I will mention that on top of that, we have secure views that allow you to create row and column level filters to keep data from getting to users, either to prevent them from seeing certain columns, or some of our customers have done obfuscation where they mix up the sensitive fields. We do recommend against bringing in any PCI data, anything along those lines, but most of the time in your data warehouse, you don't have a need for that type of data, and so it's definitely one of the things that Snowflake does best. The next question that we have up here is from Gene Davis, and just about when Unico was brought into the process, before or after the data migration. So maybe we'll ask Nate the initial question as to when they were brought in the process, and then I'd like Shankar after that to talk a little bit about their overall, how they've interacted with Snowflake and what the process is for engaging with them.
Yeah, absolutely. So Unico was brought in our engagement after the migration to Snowflake. So we already had all of the game data going and had a functional ETL scripts running. But really, Unico was brought in fairly quickly after our kind of sales cycle with Snowflake. So how Snowflake goes through the sales cycle, we're able to kind of play around a little bit, stand stuff up fairly quickly, use their documentation and examples to kind of translate it to our environment. So it was fairly easy and quick to do. But once that kind of fun playtime moved into production requirements, something like Unico was required at that time.
Yeah, just to add to that one, we have a great relationship with Snowflake. We engage in two ways. One is if the user is in the process of considering Snowflake, we get involved in the POC stage as well. And then the second stage where we get involved is the migration. If they are migrating from legacy systems like Greenplum or Redshift in some cases, and all of these databases, they have reached the max in terms of capabilities, and that's one of the reasons they consider. And we get involved in the migration process as well. We call it a jump start, which is kind of get them up to speed and what they should be thinking about, how to migrate to the new environment in Snowflake. So that is one type of engagement. And the second one is what we saw in Telltale's situation, where they were able to stand up the Snowflake very quickly and then start being productive. But then they saw some future growth issues which can crop up based on the volume of data. And that's when we were brought in and we were able to reduce at least some of those pain points very quickly. And also we came up with a purpose-built solution for scheduling, which is another thing which will be a kind of a new product or new offering from our end.
Great, thanks. We got time for just a couple more questions, but I'm going to pull one here from Litt Sharma about the visualization tools that you've used with Snowflake for Nate.
Yeah, so this is actually another piece that made Snowflake such an attractive option. One of the things that I liked in our sales cycle was understanding all of the pre-built connectors that exist to a lot of the BI platforms that are both have been around for a long time, as well as are a little bit more cutting edge. So to keep things cheaper and a little bit more straightforward, initially I used Tableau because of just simply the cost of the licenses. They had a native Snowflake integration, which made it very easy to connect to our instances and quickly pivot and visualize. Me personally, I use R. They have a native ODBC connection in R, as well as I believe other languages like Python. And then right now I'm actually looking for a more robust BI vendor. And as I talk to some of the leaders in cloud-based BI, Periscope, Looker, companies like that, Snowflake has pre-built connectors in many of them. So it really didn't limit, by choosing Snowflake, it didn't limit what BI tool I was able to access. And they integrate well with some more technical tools that I've used in my past as well.
Well, thanks again. And we're going to get one more question in here. We've got one from Ravi Potter, and he asks, he's heard in Snowflake we don't need indexes. How does it work when joining multiple tables? And then there's some other questions around optimizing in the absence of indexes. So I'll ask Shankar first, and then I can comment on it. But what processes do you use to optimize queries in Snowflake?
So when we look at the queries, like everything else, having a bad query is always going to cost you. And again, if there are unnecessary joins, we try to eliminate that. And we also look at a couple of things. Snowflake, given the performance in terms of executing the queries, we also look at how the data is being used. For example, if you are going to use this data over and over, in some cases we have created views, for example, and that becomes the driving factor. So when you execute the view first time around, it gets cached. And if you execute the second time around, it's going to be milliseconds as opposed to multiple seconds. So it depends on the way the query is being used. If it is a query which is being repeated several times, you're going to be really benefited by doing, let's say, a view, for example. And that's going to produce a faster result. And the cache kind of resides for 24 hours. Unless you don't access for 24 hours, it goes away. But then if you keep accessing it, it's going to be staying around. So that is one technique we have used, which is really helpful. And not having the indexes is not a major issue at this point in time. The way the Snowflake is architected, it's going to read very efficiently, and that the joins are available. You can use the primary key context to do the joins, and that's going to be pretty fast in terms of the machine, the way it is executing these queries, and that is the inbuilt feature of Snowflake. And having said that, there are other options available like clustering and then ordering the keys on the top versus in the bottom, since it is a columnar database. So there are a couple of techniques available to do those kind of things. Todd, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, well, we're out of time, but that was a great answer, Shankar, and I would say Unico has been one of our great partners in implementing Snowflake and helping our customers to be successful. So I just want to thank again Nate and Shankar for joining us. Thank you for all your questions from the audience. I know we didn't get to all of them, but we ran out of time. We really appreciate everyone's input, and we're excited to share Snowflake with you guys, and we'll reach out with any questions. And again, the slides will all be posted to all the attendees shortly. So thank you so much for your time today.